All right. So tonight we have a lot to talk about. We've got chapters 21 and 22, CSS and Git workflow. And so we're going to do some announcements, and then we will do the lectures on both of those. And then you guys are going to go to studio, and you're going to stay in studio because this has the potential of being a long one. And also lecture might run a little bit long. And then also your TAs are going to be going over your graded assignment with you if you got it turned in on time so that you can demo it for them, which is part of what's required for that. So I know that you guys probably many of you have a high level of stress because today was the deadline for Mars rover and it's such a difficult one. So I would encourage you to put that out of your mind because launch code is not going to kick you out if you didn't get it done quite on time or don't have everything perfect yet. This is not a drop deadline. That doesn't really happen again until the very end of the unit. To qualify for unit 2, you have to have all 6 assignments, completed and correct. That's really it. So, but things will continue to move fast. And so I encourage you to just kind of keep your eye on the prize here. And if you got stuff to catch up on, get caught up as quickly as you can, and then just keep moving forward. So let's do announcements. Graded assignment 4 is due on Monday, a week from now. There is no catch-up class since we had to adjust our schedule a little bit a couple weeks ago. This is just an MVP. That means minimum viable product, which means no bells and whistles. We do not expect you to do anything fancy. We have only been able to spend a tiny amount of time on HTML, and we're spending a tiny amount of time on CSS today. So, don't feel like it has to be some amazing thing. It doesn't. We just want you to demonstrate that you know the basics. That's it. So just follow the instructions very carefully. Make sure that you're including everything that they require you to include, and you'll be fine. This is a super fun one. Have a lot of fun with it. If you already are very comfortable with HTML and CSS, which I actually was when I was a student, I used that opportunity to learn Flexbox because that was something I had not learned before for laying out, everything. Flexbox and Grid are both great things to learn. So maybe if you already feel super comfortable with HTML and CSS, you could challenge yourself by learning something you don't know. But otherwise, if you feel like you just need to move on, just do the basics. That's fine. Okay. Let's welcome a new TA, introducing Sean Zhu. Okay, Sean, introduce yourself. I'm going to pass it over to you for just a second.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sean, and I will be a new TA working with Janisha's group. A little bit about myself. I came from the US, from China in 2018. Back then, I was an effects artist, just doing effects for 3D animation and wall mapping projects. And during that job, I got into scripting and programming. And ever since, it just grabbed my interest. And then fast forward to now, I just graduated LC101 this July, and I went into the apprenticeship program through Liftoff. And just last Monday, I got the news that I got accepted as an apprentice at Charter Communications. So I'm telling you guys about this story just to give you guys a morale boost, and also to give you guys a rough idea what to expect at the end or in the future of this life-changing program. Really, best to you all.
Thanks, John. We're very happy to have you join us. Okay, and just a reminder, there is no class on Thanksgiving. Hopefully that goes without saying, but that's coming up pretty fast. So you can just enjoy Thanksgiving. All right, let's get into CSS, styling the web. We'll talk about what CSS actually is conceptually, go over the structure and syntax. I'll give you a list of the most common properties. And apparently I'm drawing on the screen. Is that me? Okay. Didn't mean to do that. And then talk about kind of where do you put the CSS, because there's different ways to do it. And in part of talking about that, I'm going to talk about scope too. Like if you place CSS in certain places, it might override what you've got in other places. So I'll try to do a little bit of that. Not going to spend a ton of time on this because we have a lot more to talk about with Git. And I want your studio tonight is about get. So I want to make sure that I kind of go over as much of that as possible. All right, so what is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. And back in the day, and I remember this, if we wanted a new look on our webpage, we had to change every color code, everything in every single place. Like you had to just go through and find them all and change them all one at a time. Very tedious. But some genius came along and invented CSS, and it was an exciting day. And even though it wasn't what I did back then, I learned it anyway because I could see that it was the way of the future, and I was excited about it as an amateur. But it allows you to define a style once and then apply that to a bunch of different elements, and then you only have to change it once, and it'll just update the site. So it's fantastic. I mean, if you can imagine, because I remember this too, back in 2001, Amazon was kind of starting to get started, and that was back when they pretty much sold books mostly. And all of different companies, big companies, were finally going, hey, we probably need to get a website, and oh, hey, we should open an online store. That was all very new for a lot of businesses, and there were still, I mean, it was years before most businesses had websites. But back then, you could imagine you start having an online shop and you've got thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and these days millions of pages. What if you want to update the look? You really only want to have to do that in one place, right? So this is why CSS is really important. Okay, so structure and syntax. There are selectors, properties, and values. A selector is what you use to apply a style to an HTML element. And there's three kinds: elements, selectors, class selectors, and ID selectors. On the next slide, I'm going to go over the differences between the three. But for now, let's just talk about the basics. A property identifies exactly what aspect of the styling it is that you want to define. And the value just has to be set for that property. So it's kind of like a JavaScript object. There's key value pairs, and you can kind of see that in the example we've got here, but use a semicolon to separate them, not a comma. That's really the primary difference. But that body, in between the curly braces there, that just goes right after the selector, and that's all you do. Again, there's an example of a selector. This is a class. There's a property and there's the value. And that's it. And there, obviously there's 8 different properties and values in this particular definition. Okay, so let's talk about the selector types. I mentioned that there's 3 different kinds. An element selector corresponds directly to a tag, like a P for paragraph, or the entire body. If you want to set the font that, and things like that you want to be consistent for the entire page, usually you'll do things like that. A class selector corresponds to a custom class attribute. Remember we talked last week with HTML about attributes that you can put into the tags. So you can place it in there, and you would just do it like this example. You have an H3 and you want to give it a class called subtitle. That will actually correspond then to the CSS subtitle you see over on the right, where the font family is set to Arvo and the color is set to a very, very dark charcoal gray, is what that happens to be. I use it a lot. Now, notice that the class name is preceded by a period. That's the proper syntax for declaring a class definition. And a class can be used on multiple elements. That's why it's called a class, right? Because you can have lots of things that have have something in common, and you want to apply the same style to all of them. But that's different than an ID. So an ID selector corresponds to a custom ID attribute that's placed on a tag. So in this example, we've got a div, a division that has an ID of author bio. And you can see that in the CSS on the right side, I've got that set to, the font size is a little different. I want it in italics. So the ID is always preceded by a hashtag or octothorpe, which I learned a few years ago is what a hashtag is technically called. And I love that word. So octothorpe, if you will. But an ID is only used exactly once for a given HTML template. So you really are going to use them when you want to identify something very particular and say, I want to apply the style only to this thing. Okay, so that's different. So again, this is the element selector. This is the class selector. And this is the ID selector. Those are the three that you will be working with. Okay. Common properties. I am not going to go through this list one by one, but I just wanted to point out there's a lot of common properties, and you're going to need to get to know at least the basic ones, and you can experiment with them. Use resources online. W3 Schools has a ton of information and examples of how to use these. There are lots of other resources out there. So here's some of the most common text properties, and then some of the most common properties that are usually applied more to containers or other things. Just some example values. It's not by any means comprehensive. There's lots of other possible values for some of these things. And I wish I had more time to really go into this because I love this stuff. I geek out on it, but I don't. So you will have a copy of these slides later on. Once I upload them, you can always come back and reference this if you would like. And then we're also, of course, going to do a little bit of examples. Okay, so where does the CSS go? There's kind of three different ways to do it: inline, internal, and external. So inline CSS is placed inside the HTML tag using the style attribute. So you can just kind of throw it all in there and apply it just to that one element and anything that's nested inside that element, if it applies. You would want to put all the properties in quotes. You don't use the curly braces like you would if you were declaring it in a CSS file. And you still separate the key value pairs with semicolons. And in that way, you're able to have multiple ones. And I actually have an example down here. You can see I've got color, background color, and padding. I'm setting all three of those properties all in line on this div. Internal CSS uses regular CSS object syntax, and you use it within a style element. I'll show you an example in a second. You usually put it either in the head or at the end of the body content. As long as it's in one of those two places, it should work. External CSS is placed in another file. It's often called style CSS. If you have multiple CSS files, you might have, obviously different names that are more specific, but if you only have one, it's common to just call it style. You use a self-closing link element and you put that inside the head. And then you're going to use the attributes href, type, and rel, and you set them to whatever your file name is. The type is always text / CSS, and the rel is style sheet. And I don't even remember what rel stands for. I just know this is how I always do it. So that's pretty much that. Let's jump over to an example because examples are helpful. And then we'll kind of look at this and talk about scope. So I've got here, let me open both of these. I've got this, I'm going to get rid of this. There we go. Handy dandy Command J to get rid of the terminal. All right. So we have this file that has three different ways of doing this. I've got the external, the inline, and the internal. And before I do anything else, I'm going to use live server. Remember, you can get to that from the extensions over here and install that. And I'm going to right click and say open with live server. And that's going to open this up right here so that we can view it. And I will kind of, let's see, I'll make this a little bit thinner. There we go. Okay, so you can see the outcome of what I've done so far. And in the first example here, the external CSS, that's where I've used this link tag. I've set href as the file name, which I called CSS locations.css. But I could have just as easily called it style.css. And I have, text / CSS and style sheet. So all of that's set in there and that links those together. And so it knows to go and get whatever information is in that CSS file and apply it to the page. And so right now, all I've really done is I have this ID external and I've applied a border that's dark red and it's dotted, padding, width, and a little bit of a margin on the bottom to separate it from the one that's below it. And I've set the width at 50 VW, which means viewport width. That's a great way to kind of do it relative to no matter what the size of the window is, it's always 50%. Okay, I'm going to try to throw in these tidbits as I can because I wish I had more time. I said that already. Okay. And so here's the external div that I'm applying it to, and I've given it ID equals external. So as long as you have the ID set here, and then over in your CSS file, you use the hashtag external for an ID selector, it should apply any properties in here to that element and anything that's inside it. So you can see that the div is got the dotted red line around it. And I've got my H2, heading there. That's just got, classic H2 styling. I haven't done anything special. And then the paragraph below it. And then all of those are actually have a little bit of a buffer between the text and the edge, and that's the padding that I added. And if I come over here and I inspect and look at this, I can actually see, if I go into my body, oh, it's being funny on me. There we go. If I come in here to the body and I go to my div external, I can see here that when I hover over that, you see how it's got that kind of green outline around the blue box that it's highlighting for me. That green shows the padding and the orange is the margin. And so it's showing that it applied, it's by default got an automatic margin of 50% on the right side. And then that below is that 20 pixels that I have right here. And if I take these away and play with them, you can kind of see them appear and disappear. This is a great way to see, hey, I applied this thing, but what is it actually doing? You can kind of play with these and it'll show you, what it's doing. This is a great way to learn and to make sure that, you've got it set the way you really think you do. Because when you start to get a lot of nested divs, things can get a little bit, murky. So I definitely recommend styling with your DevTools open and, checking this out as you go and you make changes. Okay. Ricky, you have a question.
Yeah, how did you get to that whole side page again?
There are at least 3 ways to do it. On a Mac, you can use, Option Command I. So that might correspond to Control Alt I don't know for Windows, you can check it out. You can also right click on the page and come down here and go to inspect. And it will, this is in Chrome, by the way, and it might be different in other browsers. I'm in Chrome at the moment. So this is the Chrome DevTools. They are going to look pretty similar. It's going to have a lot of the same sections. But if you do inspect, it's always going to go to the Elements tab first. And then you can switch to console to look at JavaScript stuff if you need to. We're going to talk about that on Thursday. The other way is to go up into, I think it's View. Yeah, View, Developer, and DevTools. That's what it is for Chrome. It'll be something similar for Firefox and some of the other ones. Yeah, multiple ways to do it. If you have a different browser and you can't figure it out, just Google it. Google has all the answers for those kinds of things. Okay, so that's the external example. Real easy. We've got a div. We gave it an ID. It comes from this file. It applies it. We can see that. Inline, this is where I've actually just applied the style right here in the div. So it's not going to be able to affect anything else on the page. It's only going to affect this div and the things inside it. But sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes you want to be able to do something very specific in one place. But honestly, generally speaking, it's discouraged most of the time to use inline styling because CSS, it's more forward thinking, it's more maintainable in the long run to have your styles all defined in CSS separately. So, but you can see here, it's given that the text color is that, kind of aqua color. The background color is an even lighter aqua color. And you notice that VS Code is giving me a way, I could totally play with this right now, right? If I wanted to and change it a little bit. Yeah, and it darkened that text, but I can also undo it and it should put it back. Yeah. And then the padding I've set to make sure there's a little bit of give, on the inside of the box. And there again, I can come in here and I can select this and I can, play around with this and see, that it's changing it, right? And then the last one is the internal CSS. So this is where you can actually have a set of style tags and put your CSS in between those tags, just like you would if you had them in a separate file. But you do it right in the document. The only time you really would want to do this would be if you don't have much there. And honestly, professionally, I don't think for like just a vanilla solution like this, I don't think I've ever done it this way. I've always put it in a separate file. But to be fair, most of the time I've been working with React or Svelte or something or Angular where there are, other ways to do it. But you can do it this way if you've only got a couple things you want to change and just drop it right in here. Like I said, I can also take this out and then put it up here. And it applies it from up here in the head as well. Either way, but I'm going to put it back just for the sake of keeping my file straight. Okay. And yeah, we can see I've got, the background color set to this dark charcoal. I've got the color ghost white, which is a little bit off white and it is easier to read, not as hard on the eyes as white. I've centered the text, gave it a border radius. So you can see the curved, the rounded corners on the box. And this time I applied margin top to this box so that it would separate it from the box above it. So, as long as you put it somewhere in a system that makes sense to you, there's lots of ways to do this. Alexandra, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm currently doing all this on my laptop and I don't have access to my computer. What program is this again that you're using?
You talking about the text editor?
Yes.
This is VS Code.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's instructions in the textbook about how to install this.
Okay. Thank you.
Definitely want to use this because we are going to start moving away from Replit and you'll be doing most of your assignments now on your local machine so that you can use them with GitHub.
It's just Visual Studio, right?
Visual Studio Code. It's actually two separate things. Yeah, VS Code is more lightweight. It's just a text editor. I mean, I'll call it an IDE sometimes, but really it's a text editor.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, so here's where I want to talk about scope, and then we got to move on because we got a lot of stuff to talk about with Git. If I were to, actually establish something like in my internal file, now forget it does this. We'll do it with both of them. I go and I say, okay, I want to change these in the internal file. Look what just happened, right? On the H2s, it applied the white to everything because it actually overwrote both the inline and the external overrode, I guess is the word I was looking for. And it also changed everything to uppercase, just like you see down here. And I can change that back. And then the P, the font style was normal, which overrode the italics that I applied to, I think. Oh, no, I haven't done that one yet. Right. So I'd have to do it here. Hang on. Yeah. So if I wanted italics on one, I can turn this on, but it's not going to apply it because this one is overriding it. So I can take this off now. And then you see everything is now being applied as italics. So you can kind of see that you have to put the right things in the right places. And so really, it's a matter of making sure that if you want to change something in one place and you don't want it to be overridden somewhere else, then a lot of times the solution, I mean, sometimes you want to move it, right? And say, oh, I just want to, isolate it and apply it here. But you can also just make sure that you are applying the same property, but giving it a different value. So, yeah, so like in this case here, actually, what I should show you is this. So like the end line here, I could then come in and say, I forgot what I was doing, font style, yeah. Font style, normal. And that's not working. Why is that not working? Okay, I expected that to update the inline and it's not, and I'm not sure why. Let's do man, I had this all worked out before, guys. I really did. But I haven't looked at this for a couple of days, and so now I can't remember what order I was doing things in. Okay, so this is dark red, but we don't want the other ones to be dark red. If we don't want the other ones to be dark red, then we have to like change them elsewhere. But okay, and that's changing them all over the place. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I have to move on. I would like to spend a little more time on this, but play around with this, because the upshot is where you define things, there is an order of precedence, and you can actually like, be really intentional about exactly what you want to style where. You just kind of have to pay attention. Now, part of the problem, really, honestly, you're not usually going to have problems where you're competing with internal, external, and inline, because you're probably only going to be defining things in one place and you're going to stick to that. What really does matter is if you have something that's like in a div and it's passing down the color to things that are inside. And so like, if I wanted this to actually like be a different color, and actually, let me undo this so that it's not all crazy. Let me put it back to the way it used to be. Okay. There we go. Okay. So I could actually come here and I could say, I want to give this an ID of, inline text. And then I could come over and this is, okay. I'm going to define this elsewhere though. I'm going to define it in the external, just so I can show you how this works. Okay. And let's give this, inline text. And I'm going to give it a color of black. And now we can watch that the child tag, the element that's inside that div now has the black because I applied it to the child. So whether you do it inline or you do it from an external file, or I could have actually put that down in here. The point is this child now has a more specific style being applied to it. And so it no longer is inheriting style from the parent div. That's probably what you're going to deal with most of the time, is those kinds of decisions where you just decide exactly, how high in the hierarchy do you want to apply a style, and where do you want to be very, very granular and isolate things. But honestly, most of the time, I recommend using an external file, keeping everything organized. I like to do things top to bottom, kind of mostly in terms grouping by how things are grouped on the page, honestly. And unless it's stuff that's like page wide, like body and those kinds of things, I'll put those at the top. Okay, so we need to move on. Let me get over to back over to the slides here. We need to talk about Git. But there are lots of resources online for CSS, and it's very easy. Once you understand the absolute basics, it's very easy to continue building on that knowledge. So you guys should be good. Just use Google lots. You'll find what you're looking for. Okay, so Git workflow, using a remote repository. We're going to talk about local versus remote, how to create a remote repo on GitHub. Cloning a remote repository locally, linking an existing local repo to a new repo on GitHub, pushing local commits to GitHub, default versus feature branches, merging branches, and collaboration on a branch. Lots to talk about, like I said. Okay, so local versus remote. The idea here is that you have a centralized code base that's up in the cloud. Somebody else is hosting something, and that's where you save it. And you know how to set up a local repository, but we're going to learn tonight how to do it, how to do the remote side and link them together. It has multiple benefits having a remote repository. You keep a backup copy of your code. That's one. And having had a hard drive die on me once, I can tell you how important this is. Collaborate with others, which you're going to actually practice tonight during studio, and contribute to community projects. There's other stuff out there that you can actually contribute to. And that is this is a great way to do it. Okay. GitHub, GitLab, and Bitbucket are probably the three most common places to host remote repositories. For launch code stuff, you're going to use GitHub. Okay, so how to create a remote repo on GitHub. You should have already created an account because that was part of your chapter 22 exercises. So you go to the GitHub homepage, you click on this new button. I've got a little screenshot of this over here. And that will open the full options for creating a new remote repository. There are other places to do it, but this is the way you can like have the most control over exactly what you're setting up. You want to give it a name, and this is just unique to your account, not all of GitHub, just your account. The most common convention is to do lowercase hyphenated and just be really specific. So class 13 remote repo example, I could, that'd be one way of doing it. Part of that is just it saves confusion on, words running up all against one another. And yeah, it's easier to read. There's lots of reasons, but it's I will admit that my own repositories, and I've got like over 60 now, like are all over the place with the naming conventions. But honestly, this is really how I should do it most of the time. And this is how I recommend you do it. The description is optional, but I recommend it, especially if you think other people will be looking at it. Keep it public if you want others to be able to review or fork your code. But your TAs, obviously, if they're going to look at your code, you need to keep it public. Adding a README is optional, but recommended, especially when you start thinking about like a prospective employer, maybe wanting to take a look at some of the things you've created, and you want to be able to have a way of documenting it and explaining, what it does, and or if someone else is going to use it and you want to tell them, here's some instructions on how to use this. You will find that professionally, when you are out there and you're looking at like different libraries and things that you want to add to your projects as dependencies, those READMEs are essential. You got to go through and learn all about, how to use it. So that documentation is actually pretty important. Here at the beginning, maybe not so much, but start thinking about it because you might want to make it a habit. So then you just click on Create Repository, and it will create it for you. So let's go over and actually do that. So I'm going to create a new repository. And in this case, trying to remember what my first example is going to be. Yeah, I'm just going to create one called class 12 Git example. Oh my goodness. It already exists. I forgot it already exists. Okay, in that case, I'm going to do the class 13 Git example because I need that one too. Okay, and I'm going to say this is an example of how to create a remote repo. Okay, setting it to public. Add me the README file. I'm not going to do this just to save conflicts for another example. I wanted to do it. Well, is that true? No, I can do that. I'll add the README for this one. Okay. Yeah, if you're creating it for new, and if the local repository doesn't already exist on your computer, then add whatever you want because you're just going to copy it down to your local machine. So you can see that now it's been created. I've got this class 13 Git example. You can see that it's on my account, and it's got a main branch. That's the default I've set. And it's just got that README right there. And this is the README. It always shows right below on the your files on the main page. So that's how to do that. And I'm going to hold off on showing you how to do the local part, because I also want to show you how to create a remote repo by forking someone else's repo. There's two different ways to do this. You can create your own, but you can also fork somebody else's. So here's an example of one that you will be doing when you get later on in Unit 1, these projects that are for students to do in Angular. So you can see over here, there's this fork button, right? All I have to do is say fork. And then if I want to change the name, I can. It's already got a description. I'm going to keep it. And it says copy the master branch only. That's fine. I just want the starter code, right? So I'm going to create the fork. And it's creating it. And there it is. And now you can see it says, Carolista / Angular LC101 projects forked from Launch Code Education Angular LC101 projects. So you can see you now have your very own copy. You can modify it to your heart's content, and it has nothing to do with Launch Code's version anymore. Those are kind of the two options. I'm actually going to go and delete this in settings because I don't need this. I have my own. It's just named something different, but I understand the consequences. It's very dramatic. Okay. Oh, and it wants my freaking password. Fine. Really? Okay, let's do that later. All right, let me come back to my slides. All right, so that's how to do that. I just showed you. I just didn't go through this, but yeah. In most cases, you want to keep that, copy main branch only or master branch only checked. And then you go to your repository. Okay. So the next step is cloning. This is the part where you actually have to take the remote repository and copy it down to your local machine. So whether you, created your own or you forked it, doesn't matter. The next step is to get it down on your local machine. So on the main repo page, you're going to go to that button marked code. You can kind of see it up here. And click on that, and it opens up this little box, and you'll be on the local tab already. And so then you just click on the copy to clipboard button that's right next to the link that it's got. For right now, you guys are going to just use the HTTPS. You can also learn how to do the SSH, and that might be required in some circumstances. So that is the first step. So let's go and do that. So I'm going to come back over here to my class 13 Git example. And I'm going to come here, open up this little pop-up and click this button right here to copy that. And it says copied, gives you a little tooltip. So now I've got that on my clipboard. So let's talk about the next step. So now you want to create this local repository using this link. So from the terminal on your local machine, you want to navigate to the directory where you want your project to be. And you can kind of see I've got this example of a directory that I've called LC projects, for example. You can call it whatever you want. And it's generally just a good idea to keep them all side by side. So you would actually go there to clone it, and then you can move down in it and actually work within it after that, after it's cloned. Because you want to make absolutely sure that you're not already inside another local repository. I cannot tell you how frustrating it can be to try to extricate all of the files and fix that and figure out what happened. So just be kind of smart about where you put everything, and as long as you're organized, it probably will not be a problem. So we're going to use this command git clone and create the repo directory where we want it. And then we will be able to navigate to that directory using the cd command to change directory. And then of course, we'll just make sure that any files we create or files that we want to track are inside that repo directory. So here's one way to do this. I'm going to pull up a terminal, and I am going to cd into launch code and LC101, and then lecture examples and list. And I want to actually go into class 13. So I'm going to go in here. Okay, and this is where I want the project to live. So I'm going to say git clone, and then I'm going to paste that link that I copied from GitHub. and it'll say it's cloning, and it kind of, goes through and it's communicating with, the remote repo, unpacking objects. Now it's done. So now if I do another LS to list the contents, we can see that I've got class 13 get example right there. That is the repo. So in order to work within it, I actually have to be inside it. Now, this is where I'm going to choose to switch over to VS Code instead of my other terminal. And oops, there we go. And actually open up this terminal. And I can see here that I've got these files. There's the README that's like, the default README that was created on GitHub. They brought that with it. So you can see it successfully copied everything down. Not much there, but there we go. If I want to actually be able to do some things, I need to be in that directory. So I can, CD back out of this and go into class 13. And then, of course, I'm still not in the repo yet. So I need to CD into class 13, get example. Now I can see that README, I'm in the right place. And this is where I've got a shortcut for this, but this is where I was mentioned last week. You can see that .git directory that is where the repository actually stores all of the files, and it's hidden. So when I just do a regular list, that's why I can't see it. That LA is an alias for something. LA will not work unless you have the alias set up. I just want to mention that right now. But you can look up how to do that. There's lots of little things that you'll learn along the way that will help speed things up for you when you're working in the terminal. Okay. So I've got the thing, what do I do now? I can create files from here. Honestly, when I'm working in VS Code, I more often create files from here. So I just click on the folder that I want and come up here and say, I want to create a file. And then I can say, index.html. It recognizes that it's a file. I can use Emmet here to give myself a little thing. I'm going to take this off so it's less confusing for you guys. And I'm going to say, class 13 get example, and give that the title. This is, by the way, what shows up on the tab in the browser. That's one of the uses for this, but it's kind of the only place you're going to see it on a basic project. And so I can, add some, let's just add, a main header, and let's just say, hello there. And so now I've made changes, and this is where I'm actually going to want to, add some codes, do some commits, that sort of thing. And I can now start making changes any way I want. Before I do that, though, I want to talk about one other thing. Oh, Mina, you have a question?
Yes. What is that command LA stands for?
It is, I can tell you that. Let me get my terminal back. Hold on. So, let me go here. All right. This is my ZSHRC file. This is my basic configuration for my Z shell, which is the terminal that I use. And it's got all this stuff in it. All the things that make it all pretty with colors is at the top. And then I've got all these aliases, and you can see right here that, I don't know if you can see this. Let me, maybe that's easier. LA stands for LS, and then I've got the flags F, L, H, and A. And it helps show you more information about everything, and it also includes hidden files. That's what it does.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And there are lots of articles online to teach you how to do all that kind of stuff, if you're interested. Ezra?
Sorry, maybe I missed if you mentioned it, but is this the only way to take the folders from GitHub to VS Code? I mean, so we create first at GitHub and then take it to here only using terminal?
You mean cloning the repo to begin with?
Yes, I mean, at first you created in GitHub, right? The class 13 Git example, and you took it here by using terminal? You took it in VS Code.
Yeah, I'm using VS Code to look at the files so that I can actually work within them.
Yeah, you take it by using terminal only. Is it the only way?
So yeah, so what I was going to say is I'm the way I'm kind of dividing things is that I'm splitting. I'm using VS Code to work within the files and sometimes to create new files. But down here is where I'm running all of the Git commands. And you can use VS Code for that. It's got some built-in stuff. But I recommend that before you dig into that, you learn how to do things this way, because there's just a lot of reasons why it's a lot more flexible and you can be sure of exactly what you're doing when you're using the command line.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, because it does have, it has, I don't even remember where it is because I never use it, but there is stuff built into VS Code for you to actually use it. And I will say this, I do actually use this section a lot to view the changes that I've got, because it'll list any files that are changes. And then when you start to like commit things, it'll show you like what's staged and what's not staged and that sort of thing. And like I can click on this and see that initially this was an empty file and this is all the stuff that I added. You're going to use a lot of this in development. So this is where I kind of intersect, my version control with VS Code is this kind of thing. But for actually managing the Git commands, I use the terminal. Okay, so I'm going to close that. So let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about one other thing before I start showing you like, committing and pushing and that sort of thing. There's also the issue of, what happens if you already have an existing local repo and you want to get it on GitHub? How do you link those two things together? Because the Git file already exists, you might already have commits. So a good example here is I have this class 12 example from last time that we did. You remember this file where I had the lorem ipsum, stuff, and I showed you this little example page, and we made 3 commits, if you remember that from the last class. So this one, this already exists. So if I want to actually work with that, I can come back over to GitHub and I can come back over to my list of repositories. Oh, I have 71 now. Okay. And this is the one I want. So I've already created it. I just need to clone it down. But in this case, I actually don't want to clone it because I don't want to copy this down exactly. I want to just connect it with the local one that already exists. And so this is how to do that. Let me go through the slide first, and then I will demonstrate it for you. So from the terminal, you want to navigate into the local repo directory. So this is a little different than cloning because you don't want to be outside of it. It already exists, so you need to be inside it. And you're going to use the command git remote add origin and then use the link, and that connects them. It links them together. You can use git fetch, which tells your local repo, here's what's actually out there in that remote repo. And there's a couple commands you can also use if you want. Git branch -r lists the remote branches, and git branch will list the local branches. But then you want to make sure that you actually connect the default branches as well. And so there's one more command here to use. So I'm going to demonstrate this for you. I'm going to come over here, and I need to be now in, okay, hold on. No local changes to save. That's not true. Unless I undid it. I didn't undo it. Okay. That's fine. So we'll come over here, and I'm going to CD back into get my class 12. Okay, so now I'm back in class 12, and I need to CD into Git example because, like I said, you have to, if the repo already exists, and you can see, oh, where's the Git file? Did I get rid of it? I might have gotten rid of it. Did I mean to do that? I did, I got rid of it. Okay, we're gonna, that I absolutely did not mean to do that for this example. Okay. I'm just gonna talk this through because I've got the example right here. Back. Okay. Yeah, so if you go through this, you actually just, if it already exists, you just make sure you're in there and then you add the origin and you can, kind of see from the fetch here. Yeah, I apologize for undoing that. I did not mean to undo it. I expected it to already be there. And then you can, connect the branches with that last command. I mean, everything is right here. And then it'll go through and I'll have another slide in the slides when you go to look at them afterwards, that'll have a little bit more of an explanation of everything. The other thing that you got to make sure of is if your remote repo has something like a README file that doesn't exist locally, you could end up having a conflict. And so there's a couple other things you can do to make sure that you get it all merged together properly. And that will be on that extra slide that I'll show you guys. Okay, I have it hidden right now, so it's not coming up. But honestly, if you are planning ahead and you just create the remote one to begin with and start fresh, then you're not going to really have to do too much of that. But it's nice to know how to do it if you do need to. Okay, so pushing local commits to GitHub. If you make commits, that's fine locally, just like we did last time in the last class. But you need to actually then push those changes up so that you've got copies of them in the remote repo. So from the terminal, you want to make sure you're in the directory if you're not already there. And then make sure you've committed whatever code needs to be pushed up, because sometimes I'll be like, oh, hey, I can't push that. I haven't committed it yet. And so then I'll, usually main or master is already going to be linked upstream because you took care of that when you were cloning and everything. So then you can just use git push and it'll send your most recent commits to the remote repo. And then you can go to GitHub and verify that it's been pushed. The only time that you can't just use git push is if you're working in a branch that hasn't been tracked upstream yet because you created it locally, but it doesn't already exist elsewhere. And then you just use this command git push -u origin with the branch name. And you only have to use that the first time. And then after that, the upstream tracking is set and you can just use git push again from then on. Okay, so let me demonstrate. We're going to go back to, oops, that's not what I meant to do. We're going to go back to here and I'm going to cd back into plastic. I think this is the right directory. Yes. Oh, but I also need to go into here. Okay. So I'm in the main branch of this. I've made some changes. I can do a git status. Sorry, I'm going to use my aliases accidentally and I don't mean to. That was git status. It's just reflexive because I'm so used to it. And you can see that index.html has changes. So, and let's get the file back up so you can see it. Because I added all of this and I added this little, thing. So I can say git add dot, and that'll add that file. I can do git status again and verify that it's been staged now because it's in green. And I can also see that over here. You can see it says staged changes and it shows that it's now been staged. I could use this as a shortcut to unstage it. Oh, no, that's not it. Yeah, the minus sign would unstage it, but you can also unstage from here using this command right here. It tells you exactly how to do it if you change your mind and said, "Oop, I didn't mean to stage that file." And then I can commit it. So I'm going to say git commit. I'm going to add a message with -m. And I'm going to say created index file and added, a heading. All right, so now I've got a change. And now I want to push that to my remote repo. So I should just be able to do git push because this was already completely linked because I cloned it. And now it tells me that it was pushed to this particular repo from main to main. And if I come back over here to, and I have to go to the right one. So let me just do this. All right, so now I'm on class 13, get example. And we can see that right here, you see there's the index.html file that now exists. And you can see the most recent commit message that impacted that file. So if you have a whole bunch of different files here, you might see different messages because not all files had changes on every commit, right? But it's a kind of a quick way to tell you. But you can also go and you can click on commits and you can see, initial commit is just what is created when you create it for the first time. But then here's the one that I just made. It committed it 1 minute ago, tells you who did it, if there's multiple people collaborating. And then I can just kind of go back, to the beginning and look at the main thing. So that's it. That's all there is to pushing changes. So now let's talk about default versus feature branches. It is absolutely necessary, especially in the professional world, to use multiple branches when you have a bigger project that has a lot of different features and different stuff going on, and you're developing it just a little bit at a time. So you might remember this diagram from last time. This is where it's going to start to make more sense to you. In the professional setting, the default branch, which will be main or master, would never have code pushed directly to it like I just did when I was demonstrating it for you. You typically would not do that. Instead, you would create feature branches off of your default branch and make the changes there, and then come back and merge that code in after it's been reviewed and approved. And when you do that, that means that your program is never going to be broken because you make absolutely sure that all of your changes are solid before you merge them in to main or master. So you can kind of see up here, this example of this, and it actually doesn't really even show, it peters off before you see it coming back to main. But the idea here is that you can have branch off of main, and maybe there's a development branch that everything is being put into, because you've got a lot of smaller things that you're trying to sort out. You get it all together, and then maybe you put it back into main after that. But you can, branch off the development branch to do a feature branch, or maybe you're branching directly off of main to do a feature branch. But you can kind of see how you can create these, paths of changes. And every time you make a commit, you've got additional changes. And then maybe you decide, okay, I'm done with this branch. I'm going to merge it all back together. And then eventually the goal is to get it into the, basic, the code base that is, stable, right? That's your main branch. You are not necessarily going to do a whole lot of that, of this with feature branches right now. You're probably doing more of it in Unit 2. So you're not going to worry too much about it, but I wanted to make sure you understand how it works. So to create a feature branch, you want to make sure that you're in the default branch first, because generally you're going to be basing it. I mean, you can base it on like a feature branch on another feature branch, but a lot of times you're just going to be basing it on main because you want the most current copy of the working code, the code that is not broken and is the most updated officially. You want that to be what you're basing it off of. So you use the command get branch to check to make sure that you're on main. And once you're there, oh yeah, here's a note. If you're collaborating and someone else has merged code in to the same branch, you need to make sure to do a git pull to make sure you have the most recent version of that branch before you go back and branch off. Or of main. Yeah, actually, sorry, I'm talking about two different things. Main. You want to make sure you have the most recent version of main if someone else has been making changes to it. I'll talk more about working on the same branch in a minute, because that's what you guys are going to do tonight. Okay, so you use get checkout -b and then give it a new branch name. Typically you name your branch names the same way you name your repos, which is lowercase hyphenated. The -b part of that command, that flag, is to create the new branch. The checkout part is going to move you to that branch once it's created. So following that logic, you can just use get checkout without the -b, and that will move you between existing branches. So just keep that in mind. -b is creating a new branch, but no -b, get checkout, is just moving you between branches. And obviously you have to do that a lot. You're going to, move back to master, and then maybe you're creating a new branch. So you're going to be moving around if you're working with multiple branches. So I can demonstrate this. I can get back to my code here. All right, so let's say now that I want to create a new feature branch. First of all, let me demonstrate get branch. That's where you can just see I'm in main. It's got the asterisk by it and it's in green. That usually indicates that this is the one that you're currently in. I have my thing set up fancy to where I can also see it right here. But if you don't have that, this is how you're going to be able to tell get branch. Now I want to create a new one. So I'm going to say get checkout -b, and let's call it, my example feature branch. Because I'm not actually working on a real project, so I don't even know what to call it. But normally you would name it something very specific that would relate to the thing that you're working on, the feature that you're working on, or a specific update you're making to an existing feature, or whatever it is. You would say something, very specific. Now it says I've switched to the branch, and you can see that it's been updated. And now, and if I can prove that with get branch, and you see that main is no longer the branch. We are now in the feature branch. And so now I can make an additional change. So let's say after this, I create a paragraph, and I'll just use the lorem ipsum. And then, maybe the point of this branch was to, add an article, a specific article or a specific section of something. Yeah, let's not go with the article idea. Let's say that I'm putting some sort of a bullet list here that I wanted to include. And so I can say, 1, 2, 3, and I really should be, I told you guys, oops, I need to be here. I told you guys that you needed to be checking, doing reality checks before you make commits. So I should follow my own advice there and make sure I've got this up with live server while I'm doing it. But yeah, and I didn't mean to look at that, but you can see the changes. I added a paragraph and I added this. So I can do a commit. So get status, get add all, get status again, verify it. And now I'll do get commit -m and say, added content and bullet list to index page or something like that. I don't know. Okay. Now here's where I mentioned that if you want to push this so that now this is available for, and backed up on your remote repo, because this is the first time, like this has never existed on the remote repo like main did, right? So I've got to use that git push -u origin. So that -u stands for setting upstream. You're basically saying, I want to link this with a branch of the same name, my example feature branch. And make sure that it's going to also exist on the remote repo. Okay. And now it verifies that it now exists and that they are linked together. So it's going to be tracking it that way. And then I could make, maybe one more change and just say, I've got a footer down here and I say, this incredibly important thing is copyright 2022 C. Jones. It's not very important, but okay. So I will get status, get add, verify with get status, and then commit it. Added copyright to footer. Okay, and then now I can just push that change. And just so you know, you don't have to push after every commit. In fact, most of the time you don't. You want to make a series of small commits, like, a little bit of code here, a little bit of code there, and then maybe you push like, all 6 of them at once or whatever. You really only push when you're sure that you want to that to be updated, especially if you're collaborating with someone else. So that's that. Let me get back to here because I want to talk about merging. I'm gonna need to make this white again for you guys. Okay. So combining code from two different branches. And the most common use, like I said before, is like you're moving something from a feature branch back into the default branch. So first on your local machine, you want to push any last commits from your feature branch, which of course I just did. And then on GitHub, you want to create a pull request and get it approved, or approve it yourself if it's just your own project. And then address any conflicts that might exist. And then you can complete the merge. So let's demonstrate this. Oh, and I guess, yeah, you can choose to delete the feature branch on GitHub, not necessarily locally, but on GitHub, because once it's merged into the default branch, you don't really need the feature branch anymore. And then back on your local machine, you're going to go and just make sure that you pull the most recent version of main from main, to make sure your local is updated with the new combined, main branch. So let's demonstrate it. We'll come over here to GitHub and see how it's popped up this little thing, and it says my example feature branch had recent pushes less than a minute ago. It's making it really easy for me to open a pull request because it's saying, I just noticed that you made these changes. So sometimes you're ready and you say, okay, let's do it. Let's go open a pull request. And you'll notice here it says, base main, that's the branch that you want to merge into. And this is the branch you're merging into, that one. So, and it says able to merge automatically because I don't have any conflicts, because this didn't really interfere with anything that was already on main. The file existed, but the changes we made to it weren't mixed in with other changes in a way that create a conflict. So I can write a comment here if I want to that kind of talks about what this branch was for and whatever. I'm not going to do that now. So now I create the pull request. Now, I didn't understand this when I was a student. I'm like, why do you call it a pull request? It's not the same thing as get pull. And I was like, well, the best explanation I can come up with is that you're requesting that someone else go and pull your code so they can review it. So you can kind of think of it that way. That actually is not called a pull request everywhere. GitLab calls it a merge request, which to me makes a whole lot more sense. But on GitHub, they call it a pull request, but that's essentially what it is. You're saying, I want, maybe it's a senior dev on your team or your manager. Hey, can you go and can you pull this and look at it and test it out? And then can we merge it? Because I'm ready, Okay, so this is the pull request. It's open because it's still in review. And so in this case, it looks like, yeah, you can assign reviewers, you can assign yourself as an assignee. I mean, professionally, you would do these kinds of things. In this case, I don't have any rules on requiring approval, so I can skip that part and I can just go straight to merging it. But you can see that it includes both of the commits that I made. It's showing that that's what's going to be added to the main branch. So once you confirm it, it's done. It asks you, do you want to delete the branch? And you can say, sure. And so now if you go back to your main page here, you can see that you only have one branch now because you deleted the other one. So main's all that exists. But if you look at the file, you can see that it's got all the content that you added when you were in the feature branch because it's now been merged in. So now the last step is to come back locally and make sure you update main. So first I have to do get checkout main so that I can move back from the feature branch that's on my local one, because I haven't deleted it locally. I've only deleted it remotely. And so now that I'm in main, I'll do a get pull. And it actually updates. And now you can see that right there, it was just updating that code, right? Because I was actually, it wasn't there and now it is, because once it merges so VS Code's super helpful that way because it'll update right away and you can kind of see, yes, this has been added. Okay, let me see. We're running short on time. I want to get you guys to studio. So I want to talk about collaboration. Let's do it. Oops, wrong one. Okay. So collaboration on a branch. This is when you have multiple developers. Each person is making independent changes, and it's important that you're always working with the most recent version. So this is where the git pull and git push come in handy, because you guys are going to need to communicate. That is absolutely key. It's important. Once one person has made changes, then the other person, they push it up to GitHub so that it's available to everybody. And then you pull it down so that you're working with the most recent version. And then you make changes, and then you switch and push it back up. And this is what you guys are going to be doing tonight. You're going to be collaborating this way. So you typically try not to work on the same lines of code at the same time. You wait to pull the update from the other person first, and that prevents the conflicts that otherwise might arise. Conflicts are not entirely unavoidable, and there's ways to deal with them. But if you are careful, you usually can get away with not having to deal with it too much. So here, this diagram kind of shows you the whole shebang, right? You got this remote repository, you cloned it. When you clone it down, it creates your working copy, and it also clones it to the copy of the local repository itself. And so you work with that, and then you make your changes, and then you stage them, and then you commit them, and they're part of your local repository. And then you push that up to the remote repository. Something I didn't talk about was the difference between fetch and push. This is something that comes up sometimes. You say, what's the difference between, I'm sorry, fetch and pull. I misspoke. The difference between fetch and pull. What's the difference? Fetch is just updating your local repository with the knowledge of what's available to it from the remote repository, but it doesn't actually pull any changes down and change, actually update your branch. So if you don't want to change anything, you just want to see what branches are available, and you can use like that get branch -r I told you to see, the list of the remote branches that are out there. Just do a fetch first. But if you want to actually pull it down so that it updates the branch you're on, that's when you use get pull. So tonight you'll be using get pull a lot, because you do actually want the updates so that you can add to them and then push your changes back. But this is kind of how it works between two different developers, or multiple developers. If you guys get to liftoff, you're going to have 5 people contributing to the same code. Hopefully not to the same branch most of the time, but to the same code base. Okay. And of course, in a professional setting, you got, potentially hundreds of people. The last place I worked had what they called a mono repo, and like literally everything was in one repository, and it was a nightmare, but that was their personal choice. I didn't like it. Okay, so a couple of helpful tips. I'm not going to demonstrate this because we don't have time, but I'll just talk about it. If you need to undo your last commit because you did mean to do something, you can just abandon it and just use git reset head and then -1. That will take you one commit back to your previous commit. And what happens is it's going to return all the changes you made to an unstaged state, which will allow you to, maybe make further changes if you want to. But it doesn't like get rid of your changes. And that commit that you undid, you've actually, all you've done is move the reference, the symbolic reference head to the previous commit, so that now that's considered like the most recent code, like the most recent version. And then you can just move forward from there, and you don't have to worry about the commit that you don't want to keep. But if you don't care about the changes that you made, and you really just want to just do away with it altogether, I want to go back and pick up where I left off before at the last commit, then you use this --hard, and that will get rid of it. It destroys the commit, it undoes all the changes that you'd made, and you will be back right at the point where you had just committed the previous commit. There are plenty of other ways to undo and reset, and you can go back multiple commits if you want to. Google is your friend, look it up. Okay, helpful tips, part 2, renaming master to main. And I actually think this is also covered in the book, but this is going to happen because a lot of launch code stuff is in master, and you might have your settings to where it defaults to main, or and you have to have your configuration locally set the way you want it, and you also have to have it set on GitHub the way you want it. But if you end up in a situation where you accidentally have master on one and main on the other, or maybe they're both master and you want to change them both to main, this is what you do. So in GitHub, you use the edit icon on the branches page to rename it. And then in your local repository directory, you want to use these commands one at a time. So first, if you need to rename this local branch from master to main, you would do this git branch -m and give the old name and then the new name. And then git fetch origin will update your local repo with information from GitHub, since you already changed it there, and it'll say, okay, yes, I recognize now that, main is also the origin name of the default branch. And then you set that upstream link. Normally this is done for you when you just clone, but if you rename things, you have to set it. So git branch -u and then origin/main, main. And then that upstream link is set for your default branches. And then this last one is just setting that symbolic reference head I was talking about to point to the latest commit. And that will get everything squared away. And then your default branches main, your local and remote repositories are all synced up and you're good to go. Okay, so studio. Tonight's studio, chapter 22, communication log. You're going to pair up with a classmate and collaborate. It's what we do all the time in the real world. For part one, you're just going to get it set up. And this involves one of you setting up, like creating the repo on GitHub and then adding the other person as a collaborator. It's going to walk you through it step by step. So no worries there. But just, I want to point this out because this confuses a lot of students. You don't, the person who didn't set it up, who's just collaborating, you don't fork it because you don't actually want your own copy. You want to contribute to the other person's copy, right? So you just clone it. You clone, but you have to have been added as a collaborator in order to do that. So it's going to walk you through it step by step. Just make sure you don't fork. Okay, and then you're going to alternate these commits. You're going to push to and pull from the remote repo, like I talked about, to make sure everyone's constantly working with the most recent version. And that's it. But you have now, from now until the end of class, 8:30, to do this and to also demo your graded assignment for your mentor. Mentor is a word we use in Liftoff, TA. And so, yeah, there actually is no solution of any kind. Yeah, that's it. So coming up down the pike, the DOM and events, you are going to finally learn how to use JavaScript to make your page interactive so that a user can actually do things and interact with your page, and different things will pop up and you might have a form, there's lots of ways to do it. So I'm super excited about this. This is where it gets really, really fun. So we'll do that on Thursday. And then on Monday, we will talk about HTTP and forms. So all of this is going to start coming together in the next week. And then of course, there's no class on Thanksgiving. So that's it. I will send you guys off to do your Get Workflow collaborative activity. Have a great time, and I will see you on Thursday.
Thanks. Have a good night.
You too.